this recession is different from anything we have seen before, and not just in its extent. Assuming it lasts through the end of this month, which seems like a pretty good bet, it will be the longest recession since the Great Depression. Now, it's not the Great Depression. It is not as deep, and it's not going to be as deep. But it will be the longest we've had since the Great Depression. It is different in more ways than just length, however. When you read the newspapers, they are full from front to back with stuff about this recession, and you can drive yourself nuts trying to read everything there is and trying to figure it all out and understand it. It seems to me that what we really need is some idea of what to look at specifically that will at least tell us what's happening. There are a million forecasts out there. There's no particular reason to choose one over another. We don't know what's going to happen. But we can watch some things that will tell us what's going to happen. And it seems to me that there are two things in particular that we should pay attention to that will help tell us when this thing is going to end, when it has started to turn up. And those two things relate to the two big factors that were most important in causing this recession, this particular recession, in the first place. The first, which relates to that first headline I mentioned, is consumer behavior. The behavior of American consumers is still probably the most important thing, for a simple reason. The U.S. economy is still by far the world's largest economy, and consumer spending is the biggest factor in the world's largest economy. Consumer spending, as we have been constantly reading, accounts for 70% of all the economic activity in the United States. So what we American consumers do is enormously important. And if we stop shopping, then the whole economy stops turning. Now, what's so interesting and unusual is that in this past economic cycle, American consumers broke a basic law of consumer behavior. A law that is so basic, people have been following it since the book of Genesis. Okay? And I mean that literally. Those of you who are students of these things or remember well will recall that there's a point in Genesis where Pharaoh says, I've had a dream about 7 fat cows and 7 skinny cows. And he asks Joseph to interpret the dream. And Joseph says, what that means, sir, is you're going to have 7 good years followed by 7 bad years. And what you ought to do, because he had a policy description, says what you ought to do is make sure you save in the good years so you can survive the bad years. And that's what people have always done. It's what we did in the Depression, for example. Our personal savings rate in the late 20s was pretty high. The good times, we were saving. When times got bad, our personal savings rate went way down. And in the 2 worst years of the Depression, 1932 and 33, our savings rate went negative. We literally spent more than we made because times were terrible. And then when times turned back up again, so did our savings rate. We saved more because we could. It was a textbook example of logical consumer behavior. What we did in this cycle, from 2002 until now, is the opposite of that. During the good times, from 2002 to 2007, instead of saving more, we did the opposite. We saved less. Our savings rate went down through that whole period. And in fact, in mid-2005, it went negative. It stayed just between 0 and 1% from then until this recession began. So when we should have been saving up so we have a buffer to get us through these bad times, we did the opposite. We went more deeply into debt than we have ever been in our history. And then, when this recession started, we again did the opposite. That's when we started saving. So, it is exactly what we have never done before. And what you realize, of course, is that the logical pattern, the traditional pattern, has the wonderful virtue of moderating economic cycles. Because in the good times, normally, we're not spending all we can. We're saving some of it. So that damps down the expansion. Then when the bad times hit, we've got a cushion. We've got some money to spend. And so that tends to support us a little bit when times are rough. What we did this past cycle, instead of moderating the cycle, has made it more extreme. We spent every penny we could spend and then some during the good times. And now that we're in the bad times, we haven't got any cushion. And so the bad times are even worse than they would normally be. So as I said, when the recession started, that is when we actually started saving. And our personal savings rate has been going up every month. It is now up around 5%. It hasn't been that high since the 90s. Okay? The good thing is, well, we do need to save more. Americans really do need to be saving a lot more. The problem is that when you're saving money, you can't be spending that money. And spending money is what gets countries out of recessions. So here we are. We need to be spending in order to get out of the recession. Instead, we're saving. We do need to be saving more. But you can't do both at the same time. And that is why this is turning into the longest recession since the Great Depression. We keep saving the money, not spending it, and thus the time it takes for us to